My mother-in-law stole my wedding ring and then tried to gaslight me into believing I lost it. I should have known my relationship with my mother-in-law, Linda, was headed for disaster the day she stormed into our apartment unannounced, carrying a bag of cleaning supplies and a glare that could freeze fire. She was the kind of woman who thrived on chaos and control, someone who didn't just want to be involved in her son's life, but wanted to run it like a military operation. I had dealt with her passive-aggressive comments and her obsessive need to rearrange our furniture every time she visited, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment she crossed the line. My husband, Mike, and I had been married for 6 months, and everything was supposed to be blissful. We were still in that honeymoon phase, navigating newlywed life in our cozy little apartment. But Linda's constant intrusions had started to feel like a third party in our marriage. She was always there, whether it was her helpful texts about how to properly iron shirts or her sudden visits to check on us. She just wouldn't let us breathe. The day everything fell apart started like any other. Mike had left for work early, and I was getting ready for a job interview that I was particularly excited about. I reached for my wedding ring on the dresser, but it wasn't there. My heart sank, thinking I must have misplaced it in my rush the night before. I tore through every drawer, checked the bathroom, the kitchen, even under the bed, but the ring was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as I retraced my steps, trying to remember the last time I had seen it. I had worn it to bed, I was sure of it. The only other person who had been in the apartment that morning was Linda, who had popped by as usual to drop off some freshly made soup. I tried to convince myself that she wouldn't do something so extreme, but deep down, I knew. The ring was gone, and Linda was the only explanation that made sense. I confronted Mike that evening, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think your mom took my wedding ring," I said, barely able to believe the words as they left my mouth. He laughed it off at first, dismissing it as just another one of Linda's quirks. "Why would she do that? Mom's a little overbearing, but she wouldn't steal," he said, trying to reassure me. But when he saw the seriousness in my eyes, his smile faded. "Let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure it'll turn up." But it didn't turn up. Days passed, and every time I asked Linda if she had seen it, she would look me straight in the eye and say, "Honey, you really need to be more careful. It's so easy to lose something as small as a ring." Her words were dripping with condescension, as if I were a careless child who couldn't keep track of her own belongings. She'd smile that infuriating smile of hers, the one that said, "I know something you don't." Mike tried to play mediator, suggesting that maybe I had just misplaced it and that accusing his mom without proof wasn't fair. But the way Linda looked at me every time she feigned innocence, it was like she was daring me to prove it. I felt like I was losing my mind, questioning my own memory and sanity. Could I really have lost it? Then one day, I got my answer. I was scrolling through social media, mindlessly looking at pictures, when I saw it. A photo of Linda at a family friend's birthday party, proudly showing off her jewelry. There, on her right hand, was my wedding ring. My stomach churned, and my heart pounded as I zoomed in, recognizing the tiny engraving on the inside. "Forever, Mike and Jane." It was unmistakable. Furious, I showed Mike the picture, expecting him to be outraged, but he just looked stunned. I don't know what to say," he stammered, as if the truth had just slapped him in the face. "Maybe she's borrowing it." Even as he said it, he knew how ridiculous it sounded. I couldn't hold back anymore. I stormed over to Linda's house, knocking so hard on the door that my knuckles ached. She opened it with her usual smug smile, but it faded when she saw my expression. "Jane, what's wrong?" "Give me back my ring, Linda," I demanded, holding up my phone to show her the evidence. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw the flicker of guilt. But then, as if flipping a switch, she laughed. "Oh, sweetie, that's not your ring. I've had this for years," she said, twisting it around her finger as if to show me how much it belonged to her. "You must be mistaken." I felt the rage bubbling up inside me, and it took everything in me not to scream. "It has my engraving on it, Linda. I know it's mine." She shrugged, unbothered by my anger. Well, if you're so sure, maybe you should have taken better care of it. People lose things all the time. Perhaps this is a lesson for you. I stood there, stunned by the sheer audacity of her words. My mind raced, trying to comprehend how someone could be so blatantly deceitful and manipulative. Linda's face was a mask of calm, as if she hadn't just admitted to stealing the one thing that symbolized my marriage. I couldn't let this slide. This wasn't just about a piece of jewelry. It was about respect, trust, and the lengths she was willing to go to undermine me. I'm not leaving without my ring, I said firmly, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. Linda just sighed, looking at me like I was an annoyance she had to deal with. Jane, you're being unreasonable. It's just a ring. You're making a big deal out of nothing, she said, waving her hand dismissively. But I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way she twisted the ring nervously on her finger. I refused to back down. You're not fooling anyone, Linda. I have proof. This is my ring, and you know it. I pulled out my phone again, showing her close-up pictures of the engraving Mike and I had chosen together. There was no denying it. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her expression hardening. Fine, she said finally, yanking the ring off her finger and throwing it at me. Take it, but you're making a huge mistake, Jane. You're turning this into a war you can't win. I caught the ring, feeling its familiar weight in my hand. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a burning anger. I turned and left without another word, slamming the door behind me. The moment I got back to the car, I slipped the ring onto my finger, feeling a sense of vindication. But the victory felt hollow. This wasn't the end. I knew Linda wouldn't let it go. When I got home, Mike was waiting anxiously by the door. Did you get it back? He asked, his eyes darting nervously between me and the ring. Yeah, I got it, I said, holding up my hand. But your mom, she's something else. She basically admitted to taking it, then tried to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. Mike's face fell, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He loved his mom, but even he couldn't deny what she'd done. I'm sorry, Jane. I don't know what's gotten into her. I do, I snapped, the frustration boiling over. She's a control freak who can't stand not being the center of your life. She's been trying to drive a wedge between us since day one. Mike sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'll talk to her. This has gone too far. But I knew talking wouldn't be enough. Linda was the kind of person who thrived on drama, who needed to be the puppet master pulling everyone's strings. A simple conversation wouldn't change her. If anything, it would just make her more determined to push my buttons. And I was right. Over the next few weeks, Linda's behavior only escalated. She started showing up unannounced more frequently, accidentally misplacing things around our apartment, and constantly making snide comments about how I was too sensitive and always overreacting. It was like she was on a mission to make me lose my cool. One day, Mike and I were out for dinner when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Linda. I hope you're not upset, but I had to borrow your necklace for an event tonight. You really should take better care of your things. My blood ran cold. I hadn't even noticed the necklace was missing. It was another sentimental piece Mike had given me on our first anniversary, and she had taken it without even asking. I showed Mike the text, and his face went pale. This has to stop, he said, his voice filled with a mix of anger and guilt. I'm going to have a serious talk with her. But Linda was slippery, always finding ways to twist the narrative and make herself the victim. When Mike confronted her, she turned on the waterworks, accusing me of being paranoid and hostile. She even suggested that I had some sort of vendetta against her, claiming I was trying to drive a wedge between her and her son. She's trying to ruin our relationship, Mike. Linda sobbed theatrically, clutching her chest like she was in some soap opera. I've done nothing but try to help, and this is how I'm repaid? Mike looked torn, caught between his loyalty to his mother and his frustration with her antics. He tried to calm her down, but it was clear that Linda wasn't interested in reconciliation. She wanted to play the martyr, to paint herself as the wronged party while making me out to be the villain. I couldn't take it anymore. I realized that no matter how much Mike tried to reason with her, Linda would never see me as anything other than a threat. She thrived on control, and as long as I was in the picture, she would never stop trying to undermine me. I decided to set firm boundaries. I told Mike that Linda was no longer welcome in our home unless she could respect our space and our relationship. It was a difficult decision, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't keep living in a constant state of anxiety, always wondering what she would do next. Linda, of course, was livid. She accused me of tearing the family apart, of turning her son against her. She even tried to rally other family members to her side, painting me as the manipulative daughter-in-law who was out to destroy their happy little family. But I stood my ground, refusing to be bullied into submission. Linda's smear campaign went into full swing. She called every relative who would listen, spinning tales of how I was a cold-hearted woman who had turned her son against his own mother. She painted herself as the loving, misunderstood parent who only wanted the best for her son, while I was cast as the villain who had swooped in to tear them apart. Family gatherings became a minefield. Even those who didn't believe Linda's exaggerated stories still felt the tension, unsure of who to side with or what to believe. Mike tried to play peacemaker, but his efforts were in vain. The damage was done. Linda had always been a master manipulator, and now she had managed to divide the family right down the middle. Some relatives cut us off entirely, refusing to even speak to me, while others offered lukewarm support but suggested I should just apologize to keep the peace. I was furious. Why should I apologize for standing up for myself, for reclaiming my belongings and my sense of security? The constant drama was taking a toll on my mental health. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work, and every time my phone buzzed, I felt a jolt of anxiety, fearing it was yet another message from Linda or a distant relative chastising me for overreacting. Mike was supportive, but I could tell he was exhausted too. He was caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace between the two most important women in his life, and it was wearing him down. One evening, after yet another exhausting argument with Linda over the phone, Mike sat down next to me on the couch, looking defeated. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," he confessed. "It feels like no matter what I do, someone's always unhappy." I sighed, feeling the weight of it all. "I don't want to make you choose between us, Mike, but I can't keep letting her disrespect me in our own home. We deserve to live without this constant drama." He nodded, and I could see the sadness in his eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have set boundaries a long time ago." In the days that followed, we decided to take a break from family events. We needed space to breathe, to focus on our own relationship without the shadow of Linda's manipulation hanging over us. It wasn't easy. Mike missed his family, and I hated the idea of being the reason he felt isolated. But it was a necessary step if we were ever going to have a chance at a peaceful life. As weeks turned into months, things slowly began to improve. Mike and I found a new rhythm, one that didn't include the constant interference of his mother. We started spending more time together, rediscovering the joy that had been overshadowed by Linda's relentless intrusion. I threw myself into work. Mike picked up an old hobby of woodworking, and we found solace in the little moments of normalcy. But Linda wasn't done. She would occasionally pop up at our door, uninvited, with some flimsy excuse about needing to drop something off. She'd linger just long enough to throw a few passive-aggressive jabs, reminding us that she wasn't going away anytime soon. One time, she even left a framed photo of her and Mike on our doorstep with a note that said, "You can't erase family." It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about her mindset. She saw this as a battle, one she was determined to win. The final straw came when Linda showed up at Mike's workplace unannounced, causing a scene in the lobby and demanding to see him. She had somehow convinced herself that I was controlling him to the point where he wasn't allowed to speak to his own mother. It was humiliating for Mike, who had to drag her outside and beg her to stop making a spectacle. That evening, he came home more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "We need to do something, Jane. This isn't just affecting us anymore. It's affecting my job, my mental health, everything," he said, his voice thick with frustration. I knew he was right. Linda had crossed too many lines, and her behavior was escalating. After some discussion, we decided to seek legal advice. A lawyer recommended that we consider a restraining order if Linda continued her behavior. It was a last resort, something we never thought we'd have to consider, but it was clear that this couldn't continue. We sat down together and drafted a final message to Linda, laying out clear boundaries. No unannounced visits, no contact unless it was through Mike directly, and absolutely no more attempts to disrupt our lives. We made it clear that if she violated these terms, we would have no choice but to take legal action. Mike sent the message, and for the first time in a long while, we felt like we were taking back control. Linda's response was immediate and explosive. She accused us of being ungrateful, of abandoning her when all she wanted was to be part of her son's life. She threatened to disown Mike, to cut him off entirely if he didn't come to his senses. But for once, Mike didn't waver. He stood firm, choosing our peace over her manipulation. The next few weeks were eerily quiet. No unannounced visits, no scathing messages, no frantic phone calls. We didn't know if it was the calm before the storm, or if Linda had finally realized that we were serious, but for the first time in what felt like forever, we had a sense of peace in our home. The peace was short-lived. A month later, Linda resurfaced in the most unexpected way. Mike received a letter in the mail, handwritten, the kind of letter that would have been considered heartfelt if it weren't for who it was from. As he opened it, I watched his face go through a range of emotions: confusion, anger, sadness. Linda was pleading for forgiveness, but not in the way a normal person would. Instead of taking responsibility, she blamed us for tearing the family apart and painted herself as the victim once again. She claimed she was lonely and that Mike had abandoned her in her time of need. She talked about how she couldn't understand why we were doing this to her, as if the months of boundary crossing, lies, and theft had never happened. It was a classic Linda move, manipulation wrapped in a thin layer of guilt and pity. Mike read the letter twice, sighed deeply, and handed it to me. "I can't keep doing this," he said, rubbing his temples. "It's like she lives in her own reality where none of this is her fault." I nodded, feeling the familiar wave of frustration. She's never going to change, Mike, and as long as we keep engaging with her, she'll keep dragging us back into this mess. We decided that the best course of action was to ignore the letter. We didn't respond, didn't acknowledge it. Instead, we focused on rebuilding our lives, this time without the constant dread of what Linda might do next. It was hard, especially for Mike. No matter how difficult she was, Linda was still his mother, and cutting her off completely felt like losing a part of himself. But he knew it was necessary. He had to choose our peace over her chaos. As time went on, the distance between us and Linda grew wider. Mike continued to get the occasional text from other family members, usually guilt-tripping him about how he needed to make amends or reach out to his poor mother. But Mike stayed strong. He had finally seen Linda for who she truly was, a woman who would do anything to control the people around her, even if it meant hurting them in the process. We started new traditions, creating memories that were just ours. Weekend getaways, game nights, cooking dinners together. It was all simple, but it was ours, free from the shadow of Linda's interference. Mike and I grew closer, our bond stronger than ever now that we weren't constantly battling his mother's toxicity. One day, Mike received an email from his cousin, someone we hadn't heard from in a while. He hesitated to open it, worried it was just another message trying to drag him back into the family drama. But when he finally did, he found a heartfelt message thanking him for standing up to Linda. His cousin explained that she, too, had been on the receiving end of Linda's manipulation for years, but had never felt brave enough to say anything. Mike's decision to set boundaries had inspired her to do the same, and she was grateful that someone in the family had finally called Linda out on her behavior. Mike was moved. For the first time, he felt validated, like he wasn't alone in this fight. We both realized that, while setting boundaries had been incredibly difficult, it was also necessary, not just for us, but for everyone who had been quietly suffering under Linda's control. Years passed, and Linda's attempts to contact us dwindled. She eventually moved to another state, presumably to start fresh and find a new audience for her manipulations. We heard through the grapevine that she had joined a local church group and was already making waves with her larger-than-life personality. It was almost laughable. Linda would never change, but at least she was no longer our problem. Mike and I focused on building the life we had always wanted, free from the constant drama and tension. We bought our first home, a cozy little place with a garden that we spent weekends working on together. We even adopted a dog, a goofy rescue mutt that brought joy and laughter into our lives. For the first time, our home felt like a sanctuary, a place where we could truly relax and be ourselves. Looking back, it was hard to believe how much of our early married life had been consumed by Linda's antics. But in the end, we had come out stronger, more united, and more determined to protect our peace at all costs. We had learned the hard way that sometimes, even family can be toxic, and that it's okay to cut ties when those ties start to strangle you. Mike still missed his mom in a way. He missed the version of her that existed before all the drama, the mom who had once been loving and supportive. But he had made peace with the fact that Linda's love came with conditions, and those conditions were no longer acceptable. We had chosen ourselves, our happiness, and our future over her manipulations, and we would never look back. We continued to focus on our journey, creating a life that was full of love, respect, and boundaries that no one, especially Linda, could cross. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was more than enough.